George, this NFC race, man, I want to start there. It's been super fun to watch. And 2 weeks ago or so, we're like, oh, Vikings are in pretty much. It's going to be fine. And then all of a sudden, Los Angeles emerges. Like with the rays of the California sun behind them, they are in the race all of a sudden. What are we to think about the Vikings trying to hold off the newly emerging Los Angeles Rams?
Well, the newly emerging Los Angeles Rams, I think, are a little bit fraudulent. They've beaten some teams that are not particularly great, which has kind of been their MO this season, right? They've beaten the bad teams and gotten whipped by, any of the good teams. So I'm not overly concerned about the Rams. They have the Cowboys this week, which I think is a very winnable game. So, if they do win that game on the road, then it is a little bit more concerning. But the Vikings are in the driver's seat, obviously, and have a Chargers team that is certainly, if you had the choice of playing in Los Angeles against the Chargers or in Dallas against the Cowboys, you probably would prefer the Chargers.
George, staying a little bit here in the NFC North, a matchup I don't think anybody really cared about a couple of weeks ago, a little more intriguing now, Chicago visiting Lambeau Field and Green Bay, which, as you mentioned, with the Vikings being in the driver's seat for a playoff spot, the Packers are still in the driver's seat for the NFC North title. That said, Mitch Trubisky has sort of gotten off the autopsy table and showed himself to be somewhat productive here. What do you look at in this game? Because people in this market are going to be hoping for a Bears upset that maybe isn't as unlikely as it was, say, 3 weeks ago.
I don't think you're certainly right. Not as unlikely as it was 2 weeks ago. But I think the real reason that it's not that unlikely of an upset has more to do with the Packers not being nearly as good of a team as their record indicates. Their offense has really not gotten any better with Matt LaFleur there. And so the reason that I think this could be an upset is that it's probably a low-scoring game. And Mitch Trubisky has certainly played better because there was nowhere else to go but better. And so even though it's a small sample size, you figure, look, you won't be totally abysmal, which gives you a chance to beat a Green Bay team that probably shouldn't scare you as much offensively as the names on the back of their quarterback's jersey might. So, right now it's like, 4.5 point spread for Green Bay, which I think shows that, the public, as usual, likes, gives a little bit of extra juice to the Packers. But man, Chicago is getting Akeem Hicks back. They have had a fairly solid and talented defense for quite some time. I think they've got a legit shot to keep this one close and win it at the end.
So, George, it's really fascinating to me that the Vikings could end up out of the playoffs or they could end up with a home playoff game. And the way that I've been saying it, though, tell me if you agree with this, is of all the teams in the NFC, it's in terms of trying to line it up the way you want it. If you're the Vikings, you would say, take the Packers here or there. Because I'm with you. I just don't think that they're a really great team. I don't see the same Aaron Rodgers that used to be there. I certainly don't see a whole heck of a lot of weapons that he has aside from Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, and a defense that started out kind of hot but is really faded. They've got some game records, but aside from that, they're just okay. And the fact that they beat Washington by 5 points last week, they're just not a really impressive team. And with the Vikings, if they could just take care of the business they're supposed to take care of, they could possibly end up with a home playoff game against Green Bay. And that would be, to me, the ideal situation going into the playoffs.
Absolutely. So you look at the NFC, and unless you can find a way to play the NFC least winner at home,
I'll give you a courtesy laugh on that one. I like it.
Thank you. I've been using that for a couple of seasons now, and it's finally starting to catch on. That's the optimal. Look, if I have to play, in wild card weekend, please God, send me to Dallas or Philadelphia or, whoever they decide should win that division. But the Packers are the team that, you look at the teams with double-digit wins. You've got the Niners and the Saints who, according to our power rating and just, I think, the eye test, watch that game of the year so far, Saints-Niners, they're in a tier of their own. in the NFC. And then you look at the other two 10-win teams or double-digit win teams. You've got the Packers and the Seahawks. The Packers and Seahawks are both fraudulently at 10 wins, but the Seahawks have the better quarterback. And so if you're in the playoffs and you're like, okay, which team do I want to play? You want the team that has got, that has kind of got there by hook or by crook, but still their quarterback is playing kind of mediocrely. If you have to face Russell Wilson in a close game, he's just been so good this season. He's the MVP of the NFL this season. I know it's unpopular because Lamar Jackson has been so great, but he has played the best at the quarterback position this season. So it's certainly the Packers of that group that you want to play. You're dead on with that.
George, you picked up where I was going to ask you about the MVP race a bit here. Obviously, Lamar Jackson is the breakout star. He's got a lot of eyes on him. He's doing a lot of different things. Well, not different things, but he's doing things that have been popular in the NFL in recent years, and he's doing them at a really high level right now. But Russell Wilson is also a leader. Russell Wilson has also got some credentials. And I guess who's more responsible for their team's success right now? Do you think Russell Wilson or Lamar Jackson?
Well, there is the kind of argument of, Lamar Jackson has changed the culture in Baltimore and yada, yada, yada. And I'm not going to try and argue against that. I'm just going to argue for what they've done on the field and using, all of the things that we've learned mathematically, who has contributed more to their team winning. And when you do that, it is Russell Wilson, and it's not that close. And here's why. What Russell Wilson is asked to do is take a team that is average to below average, basically everywhere else, particularly on the offensive line. And he is asked to play from behind. He's taken more than twice as many snaps when losing compared to Lamar Jackson, and yet propel this team to a 10-3 record. And when he does so by throwing the ball. And when you throw the ball, that is mostly on the quarterback. So the quarterback picks up the win shares for those plays. Lamar Jackson, on the other hand, while he's been phenomenal, has a scheme and a set of players, an offensive line for one, that is the best in the NFL, that are helping create an environment in which he can be awesome. And he has been awesome. But when you run the ball, it depends on more of the ancillary pieces, the run blocking, scheme, the play call, the situation, all of those things. So while Lamar Jackson has been my favorite player this season, the one that I most enjoy rooting for and watching, Russell Wilson has been the more valuable one.
Talking with George Chahuri of Pro Football Focus. And we saw some of that in Seattle with Russell Wilson, where everything went wrong against the Vikings. They find a way to pull it out, including him batting a pass to the other team, which I can't remember ever seeing anything quite like that. But the rare mistake from Russell Wilson. Something that has been really interesting to me, George, and I want to get your statistical perspective on this. So last year, Stefon Diggs was averaging like 10 yards a catch, which is just, about where most tight ends are. And this year, he's one of the top in the entire league in yards per catch and catches 70% of his passes, which is just bananas. I mean, even guys like Julio Jones are usually in the 60% range. What does that say about receivers and circumstances, and I guess him as well, for the value that he brings to the Vikings?
Yeah, it's very interesting because he is graded similarly to how he did last year. And a big reason for that is that he's actually had more drops and fumbles this year than he did last year. And those kill you. I mean, those are bad plays, right? Mm-hmm. But he's got a ton more splash plays. And you bring up circumstance, and that is so massive, right? And here's what I point to for the Vikings. The resurgence of the Vikings offense and Kirk Cousins has been because they have run a lot of play action. And what play action does is it gives you more time. And regardless of how good your offensive line is. In fact, if you have a bad offensive line, you should still run a ton of play action because it gives you more time, and you should just realize you probably need to run shorter routes because your offensive line is bad. But I digress. For the Vikings, it allows Stefon Diggs to get downfield and for Kirk Cousins to wait for him to get downfield. And so that's why on those play action passes, Stefon Diggs is just eating opposing cornerbacks and defensive backs alive. His average depth of target on play action plays is 22 yards downfield. He's got 406 yards receiving on those plays, just fifth in the NFL. And so I think that the just overall scheme for the Vikings has really helped him quite a bit. And obviously Kirk Cousins finding a little bit of mojo after that start is huge. But the receiver needs a quarterback that is going to deliver the ball to make plays, and needs a scheme that's going to allow the quarterback to do so. And so that's why the results are much better on most of the time. The drops and the fumbles are one thing, but most of the time Stefon Diggs has had a lot of success, and that's the reason why, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's just been a perfect fit with this scheme and both Kirk Cousins and Stefon Diggs. And George, I was thinking a lot about Stefon Diggs as a 5th-round draft pick the other day, and looking back at the 2015 draft and how many receivers were taken that were just really stupid fast. Like, look at this guy's 40. Oh my God. And then, bust, of course, a couple of years later. I wonder how you guys look at wide receivers when they're coming out in the draft, because I don't know how it compares to other positions, but it seems like it's the one where you go, that guy wasn't the fastest. That guy didn't have the best combine results or something, but yet look at his route running, look at his contested catches. Like, how do you deal with that when you're trying to figure out which receivers should be on the field and how to use them best, and which ones are going to come out in the draft to be successful?
Yeah, it's a great question. We get really enamored with the combine. Why? Because guys are wearing tights and they're running fast. And
super fun. Super fun. I'll never apologize for it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a blast to go to. It's a cool event. We're starving for football when it happens. But in our college to pro projection system, we leverage all the things. And combine is a very small piece of the whole thing. Look, if you're athletic, it's going to show up on the field, right? And if you're athletic and can play football, then you'll be productive on the field. And so there is certainly a component of it, which is like, hey, if you're not athletic at all and you've been playing bad competition, then we're not going to like you a ton, because we're going to normalize for all those things mathematically. Mm-hmm. But what we want to see are, above all and anything else, is guys that can perform and produce on the field at the college level in situations and in schemes that they're going to see at the NFL level. And what Stefon Diggs brought to the table was this incredible route running ability, right? And so you see a lot of guys in college who can succeed just kind of going downfield, in a straight line. And what Stefon Diggs had is I always thought he reminded me a ton of Antonio Brown. Their route running is just so precise. Antonio Brown, I believe, was he a 5th-round pick, 6th-round pick, something like that?
5th, yeah.
So, you can find those guys, and oftentimes you'll find them in systems that, don't get a lot of national attention, or poor offenses overall for, myriad other reasons. It's obviously, the draft is hit or miss, but you can increase your chances of hitting by just not overweighing things that don't matter that much, and the combine is one of them.
George, I wanted to pivot to the defending world champions. Now, putting aside all of the latest off-field, kerfuffle and stuff that we already we got into at the top of the hour. They're 10-3, but they don't feel 10-3. They don't look 10-3, and they certainly don't look intimidating. Opponents don't seem to be scared too much of the Patriots. If I'm a Patriots fan, and I would never be that, but if I am, what concerns me most at this point?
Well, I was just talking about this with a couple guys downstairs, and I think what it is that usually when they're struggling, they've got this but. And the but has always been, they've got Gronk and they're not using him right now. And they don't have Gronk, and so they can't use him now, and they won't be able to use him later. And last season, the struggles were on the defensive side of the ball. And you said to yourself, well, at least they've got Tom Brady, right? And now the struggles are on the offensive side of the ball. And Tom Brady looks kind of depressed back there, right? And they have gotten rid of the two most athletic guys that they had running routes for them in Josh Gordon and Antonio Brown. And right now they've got guys on the outside that just, I think they can't win against anybody. And they aren't they're not smart enough. They don't have such a keen sense of the scheme to win with intelligence, which is what Brady has always been able to rely on, right? He knows so well what he's going to do that he gets rid of the ball as quickly as anyone else, delivers it on time and accurately. But you can't do that if guys aren't getting open. And Brady's not going to scramble around for 3+ seconds and then, take off. So he does rely on that to a certain extent. I agree with you. They don't feel 10-3. They're lucky because they have such an easy road. And this year, they've lost to the teams they're supposed to lose to, which kind of sounds like, oh, well, that's okay. They lost to bad teams last year. But that was the whole thing. They lost to bad teams last year, and you just kind of wrote it off because they did beat, Kansas City in that crazy game in New England, right? They had some wins that gave you encouragement. And I think this year, they just don't have any wins that have given you encouragement. I mean, they've been hanging in games with trick plays, to be perfectly honest. So it doesn't seem like there is a real reason to be optimistic about their receivers all of a sudden gaining athleticism or learning the scheme perfectly. So I totally agree with you. I think there is reason to be concerned, but not overly concerned given how easy their schedule is and the fact that home field matters. Not having to play the first week of the playoffs matters. And Tom Brady is still playing well. And they have a defense that can cover. So all of those things, Bill Belichick, New England, we shouldn't over-exaggerate, but it's okay to say that they are looking a little different, a little saggy at this point in the season.
A little saggy. Well, now that we don't that they don't have the Cincinnati tape, I don't know what they're going to do. So they're not gonna be able to pull it out this week. George, love listening to the PFF Forecast podcast with you and Eric Eager. I implore people to go check that out, and I appreciate your time. We'll catch up with you again soon.